Shalom, shalom. This week we read Parshat Eikev, which is chock full of things that really, really resonate with me. And I've spoken about many of them in previous years. I have at least, I don't know, 4 videos on Parshat Eikev in the past, speaking about things. But I wanted to do something different and something of extreme importance, and that is the land of Israel and how it's tied to the Jewish people. But first, I want to begin with a quote that is in this week's parsha that says, "Not by bread alone does man live." And this, there's so much meaning in this. But the first thing that I'd like to explain is that, man needs purpose. Man needs meaning in his life. And that while, yes, it might be the bread that sustains him physically to keep on going, right? That doesn't differentiate us from any other uh, living animal, right? What man needs is a purpose. He needs a meaning. He needs something to devote his life, something that speaks to his soul and that he can live for. Because although we might be sustained by bread, and it will give the body the life to go on, in order to have real life, a life that animates us with purpose, we need that. We need a focus and something that speaks to our soul. And God gave mankind a purpose, and we see this all the way back in Bereshit, where He tells man to puravu maluatar, to continue to procreate, to fill the land, to be a partner with Him in he started with the creation of the world, but to perfect it and to make it a wonderful place. And this is the purpose of every man. But for the Jewish people specifically, God gave the Torah to follow, and we are supposed to be the people that live according to God's Torah and to be a light unto the nations. And He gave us the land of Israel as an inheritance to live and to be like God, to follow in His ways and to follow the commandments that He gave us. And this land of Israel is contingent upon those things. And God repeatedly tells us in this week's Parsha that we have to guard and keep His commandments. And He tells us that, I'm going to bless you, you're going to go in the land, and you'll be able to eat and drink, and you'll be prosperous. You'll build your homes, you'll even have gold and silver, you'll have everything. But be careful. Be careful when this happens to know that it's not, and He says, kochi v'yotzim yadi, this concept that we think that when we do well and that when we prosper, we give ourselves a huge pat on the shoulder, and we get very haughty, and we think that it is the actions of our own hand that has allowed us to be successful. But God says it's not. Do not forget that it is God who gives man that koach, who gives man that strength to do all those things in order to be successful. And it is only God who sees to it that your efforts are not in vain and that they produce. Because we all know man can work from here to tomorrow on his farm, but if it doesn't rain, that won't happen. Or you think you're so smart, you can be a good businessman. If you can't make the right connections, there's so many things that go into it that um, you know have to go right, and God's the one who sees to it when we succeed that those things went in that direction, and we should not forget that, um, because that's what happens. That's what happens to people many times when they're successful. As a matter of fact, when people are needy and they need things, it is the nature more of them to turn towards God. And that's why I think, we are commanded to have Birkat Hamazon, to thank God after we eat, as opposed to, it doesn't tell us that we need to, biblically ordained, to make a blessing before we eat, because man's nature is to turn to God when he is in need. But it's also his nature that once he's satisfied and once that need is provided for, he forgets everything where it came from and goes on to the next thing. That's another concept that's also in this week's parsha that God says we're am kashe oref. We're a stiff-necked people, which I think also, if you think about it, this doesn't just mean stubborn. But stiff neck means when you have a stiff neck, right? You can't turn and look backwards. You can only look forward, right? And that's what happens after we have our needs provided. We don't look back and say, "Oh, we really need it, and now we and God gave it to us, and thank you," and to thank God for everything that came before that got us to this point. We tend to just look forward to the future. What's there? What are we going to get? What's ahead of us? And so the benching is this concept of don't be anxious, be able to turn back around and say, thank you for that meal that sustained me. Thank you for everything that came before me. And it was this stiff neckedness that got us in trouble in the first place. That's God first uses it when we did the sin of the golden calf. Why? Because we didn't see Moshe coming down and they were worried about their future instead of looking back in the past, see everything that God did to take them out of Egypt and to bring them until this moment and to know that with all of that, God would just not abandon them at that moment. And it's all this that we're reminded before we go into the land. Because God gives us the land, He wants us to keep His commandment and represent. He wants us to be good, moral, ethical people, working together, helping the poor and needy, and doing all sorts of um, good, honorable acts. And if we don't, we are told the land will spit us out because the land is given to the Jewish people to do good and to be good. And then God says you won't have to worry. He'll take care of all of our enemies. He'll make sure that they're not bothering us or a threat to us or even throw them out. And our nation tends to look always towards politics, to this political leader, to this thing, to that thing, to blame the other person, add more sinat chinam, add more hatred, instead of understanding that it's not one person that pulls the string. It's not his power. It's not his koach that God says, beware. It is God. Everything that comes out, it says, man does not live by bread alone, but only what emanates from the mouth of God. So it is God who gave us everything we have now. The land that the bread came from is from God. And if we follow in God's way, He will ensure our safety. That's where our security lies. And so we have to do that in order to keep the land and to be prosperous. And it's in this parsha where we get the second paragraph in the Shema. Last week we had the Behafta, and now we have in Tishmo, if you listen, what will be, and we should follow them so and keep them as and cling to God's and God's good ways. Be like God, be godly. And then we will keep the land, and we won't know from horrors that we know from, and we'll only know from the good. We are a collective nation, we are a whole, and all of that affects our well-being and resonates out to the rest of the world. There's no peace in the Middle East. There's no peace in the rest of the world. And I think this is a crucial message for us to really try and digest and to just try and be good to one another, live moral and ethical, and then hopefully live happily ever after. That's right. Shabbat Shalom.